Let's talk about dark under eyes and how you can get them covered up, because this is something that I get questions about all of the time. So you were probably taught that to cover up dark under eyes, you needed to use a concealer. And usually, traditionally, concealers are a lighter shade. And the idea behind it is that if you have darkness underneath your eyes, you're gonna put a color on top of it that is going to be lighter and brighter. And that's going to kind of erase the darkness and brighten up that whole area. And what I need you to do right now is completely erase that way of thinking. When you're working with a cream product like Seint IIID Foundation, if you go on to an area that is darker with a lighter shade, it's going to actually emphasize textures and it's going to accentuate some of the details that you're actually trying to mask. The skin underneath our eyes is very thin and very delicate, and it's constantly moving. Because if you think about it, every single expression that you make involves your eyes, which means that the skin around it is going to be in constant movement throughout the day. So when you apply a lighter product onto an area that's darker in order to try and conceal it, a couple of things are going to happen. If you're trying to conceal something that's dark with something that's light, it's going to require a lot of that light product to go on top of that area to eventually mask the darkness that's underneath, which means you're gonna have to apply a lot of product underneath your eyes if you're using a light concealer and able to hide that dark under eye. And as I talked about before, underneath their eyes, the skin is very thin and there's a lot of movement that happens. And so when you have a lot of heavy product underneath their eyes and there's constant movement happening there throughout the day, that product is eventually gonna start to settle and it's gonna cause creasing and texture and eventually create a whole issue that you are usually trying to avoid. The other thing that happens, which a lot of people don't realize, is that when you put something light on your face, the idea behind like highlighting and stuff like that is to emphasize those areas and to bring those areas forward. Whereas when we're going in with something dark, the idea is that we're trying to create a shadow and we're trying to kind of pull it away and make it disappear. So when you're putting something really light underneath your eyes, you're kind of drawing attention to that area. And again, if there's a lot of product there, you're drawing attention to an area where there's issues, and that's kind of what we're trying to conceal. We're trying to hide the issues that are there, the darkness, any like fine lines and wrinkles and texture that tends to happen as we mature, and yet we're putting a product there that's actually putting it into the spotlight. So to avoid these issues, I'm going to show you two different approaches to covering up the dark circles underneath your eyes while still being able to accentuate your eyes in the right way and allowing you to show off one of your best features. Now, in the first approach, I'm going to be showing you how to use 3D foundation to correct underneath your eyes. And in the second approach, I'm going to be using Seint Demi Correctors. Remember when I said that I want you to erase the idea of using a lighter highlight shade? The reason why is because we're actually gonna go in with a darker highlight shade to conceal underneath our eyes first. Now, when I color match someone to Seint IIID Foundation, I always recommend 3 different highlight shades, and the darkest of those shades, I always refer to it as the color corrector, and this is the shade that we're gonna start with. Now, ideally, you would use a smaller brush. So some of my favorites for color correcting underneath the eyes would be things like the spot brush, the small end of the eyeshadow brush, the multitasker brush, or the bright brush. If you don't have one of these brushes, that's okay. You can definitely improvise and you can use like your finger or just be really careful and intentional about the placement with other brushes, maybe like the small end of the detail brush. But if you can get one of these smaller brushes, it will help with the application. So what you're gonna do is you're gonna go in with a very small amount with your darkest highlight shade, and you're gonna start in the area that has the most depth and the darkest coloring. So usually for most people, that's gonna be in the very inner corner of the eye, but just kind of pay attention to your own eyes and the needs of your skin and just focus it there. So you're gonna start at the darkest point and you're just going to very gently press in that product onto the areas where you have that deeper pigmentation. And the idea behind using a darker shade like this is that you are matching the depth of color underneath your eyes with a color similar to it. So basically they kind of neutralize each other because they have that similar depth to them, but one of them is going to be a little bit closer to the skin tone, if that makes sense. And remember, you only want to use the product where it's absolutely necessary, and you want to put as little product as possible on that area, because the idea is that we are trying to conceal it, but we're also trying to limit the amount of product just because we don't want to have any of that texture showing later on throughout the day as there's more movement happening around our eyes. And then once I've got that color correcting shade underneath my eyes, I always like to take the damp perfector sponge. This is pretty essential in my opinion, especially if you have more mature skin, and I'm going to very gently press in the product that I have placed there. And that is going to help press in the product and pick up any excess. So again, it's gonna limit the amount of product that I have in that area to what is essential and not leave any of the excess that's gonna cause texture issues later on in the day. And once I've got that area concealed, I still want to be able to brighten it up a little bit because I do want to accentuate that area. So what I'm gonna do next is I'm then gonna go in with my lightest highlight shade, and I'm gonna place it very strategically in two places. So I'm gonna take my brightest highlight shade and I'm gonna pop it just right here in the very inner corner, and then I'm gonna pop it right here on the very outer corner of my eyes. And then I'm gonna take that perfector sponge again. I'm gonna press in that brightening highlight very gently into that area just to blend it out. Now, notice the stark contrast between these two sides. On this side, the darkness has been concealed, but because I also strategically placed a brightening highlight on this side is also being brought forward and accentuating this eye to make it stand out in a positive way. You've probably noticed that I did not use any powder on this side. I personally recommend trying to avoid it. Powder will emphasize texture, and it's just adding one more layer of product to an area that, again, we're trying to have as little product as possible in that area. So if you can avoid powder, I strongly recommend it. If you are someone who really feels like you need powder, just make sure that it is translucent, make sure that it's a finely milled powder, and make sure that you apply as little powder as you can possibly stand to get away with, because again, less is always going to be more when it comes to the products you're using underneath your eyes. Now, this technique that I have used using just my darkest highlight shade and my lightest highlight shade is going to work for the majority of people. However, there are some people that have excessively dark under eyes, and the dark under eyes is a completely different color from the rest of their skin tone, which means they may need to use a different shade specifically targeting their under eyes. If you are a customer of mine and this is an issue that you're experiencing, I am always happy to recommend a different color that you can use to address this problem. Sometimes it's gonna be a darker highlight shade, sometimes it's even gonna be a lip and cheek color. And when that's the case, usually you are going to have to use the lip and cheek color or the darker highlight shade that we're using to color correct those under eyes first, and then place your highlight color on top of it. So instead of just having a single layer, it'll be a double layer, but you'll use a very thin amount of both of them so that way you can keep it still as close to a single layer as possible, if that makes sense, because again, we want to avoid having too much product underneath our eyes. Now, let's dive into technique number 2, and this is actually using the Seint Demi Correctors. Demi Correctors are going to differ from using a highlight shade because with a highlight shade, you're basically kind of putting a layer of makeup there to mask what's underneath. Whereas with a Demi Corrector, you're actually using very little product and you're using color science and color theory because you're trying to find a shade of Demi Corrector that is the opposite or the complementary shade to the excess color that is showing on your skin. Now, I have a whole other video that kind of dives into what Demi Correctors are, and it even talks about how to color correct underneath your eyes using it. But basically, what I need to do for like my eyes is I have a lot of excess blue underneath my eyes, and so I'm gonna use a shade of Demi Corrector that has some orange in it, because orange is the complementary color to blue. And I'm gonna place that orange shade on top of the blue to help essentially cancel out the blue and neutralize the area using very little product. So similar to the technique I used on this side, I'm going in with a very small brush with very little product, and I'm just focusing on the areas where I have the deepest pigmentation and where I have that excess color. And I'm just going in very lightly with this product. I'm gonna then blend it out a little bit, and I'm just gonna target those areas where that depth is with this Demi Corrector shade to help neutralize the area and get rid of the darkness and the excess blue that's there. And then I will just continue to work my way across my eye where I have this depth still showing through, and just continue to neutralize the different areas. Now, you'll notice a difference between the two sides. The idea behind Demi Correctors is to create a more natural skin-like appearance while being able to erase the distractions by neutralizing the area. So it's a little bit more of a natural finished look. Whereas on this side, I obviously used makeup products and was able to conceal the darkness and use some highlight to kind of accentuate the area. So it just kind of creates a different look, and it just depends on what you're going after. For most people just getting started with Seint makeup, I usually recommend this technique because it's a lot easier to master and it's using products that are already in your palette. Demi, even though it didn't appear hard, it's actually a little tricky to really grasp the concept of Demi and understand what shades to use, how to place the product, and all of that. And so it does take a little bit more patience and a little bit more practice, and it also requires additional products. So usually with Demi, unless someone really wants to get started with it right away, I usually recommend waiting on Demi until you've mastered your other products first. If you are interested in using Demi Correctors for your under eyes, Seint has actually made it really easy because they have created a bundle. It's called the Wide Awake Edit, and it is colors that they have put together that are specifically curated for addressing dark under eyes. And if you get that edit along with the spot brush, that is a great place to start with using Demi Correctors for dealing with dark under eyes. Now, just as a quick disclaimer, if you have issues like puffiness or wrinkles that are underneath your eyes that bother you, these techniques are not going to erase those. Those are just the genetic makeup of your skin. But they can still be beneficial in the sense that if we can take away some of the other distractions like darkness underneath your eyes, you can still kind of soften up your overall look and allow yourself to kind of focus on some of your better features like your eyes and your cheekbones and things like that, so that the focus is no longer on the things that bother you. So I hope this was helpful, and if you have any additional questions, please feel free to reach out and ask. I'm always happy to answer them, and always remember that a little bit of practice and patience goes a really long way when it comes to mastering any kind of makeup technique. Now, if you are not already a customer and you are interested in Seint's makeup, I would absolutely love to help you get started. I will include a form where you can submit a photo to me and I can help recommend some custom shades that are perfect for your skin tone, along with all of the recommendations I have for getting started with 3D foundation. And if you are interested in the idea of being able to make some money by sharing about this makeup, I would love to talk to you more about the Seint Artist Program. It's something that I've been a part of for a number of years now, and it's been an incredible opportunity and blessing in my life and my family's life, and I would love to be able to mentor you here on the business end of Seint if that is something that you would be interested in. So I will also drop a link with some information so you can learn more about that, and then if you have additional questions, be sure to reach out.